All right, in the last screencast of Module 1, we are going to talk a little bit about the history of paints and pigments, as well as art, as we're going to see throughout this class. So, one of the first artistic endeavors were cave paintings by ancient people. And so, what you're seeing here, as far as this picture is concerned, are people put their hands up, right? And then they used a probably a blowpipe, or a lot of times they just put the pigments in their mouth and sprayed, and then they removed their hand, and that's what left the handprint. And so what you can see here is some of the red ochre, okay? And so red ochre is found, and so when we talk about that, I plan on bringing some to class. But there's red ochre, there's yellow ochre, there's a lot of different things here. And so it was sprayed onto the hands to kind of leave these handprints. Now, these particular cave art paintings were found in a cave in France. They're the Lascaux caves. And we'll talk about them a little bit more in class. They're believed to be approximately 17,000 years old. Right? And they're cave paintings. One of the things that we found out from these cave paintings is that when chemists took samples of the black paint, they found out it wasn't carbon black, which was pretty interesting. It was instead called a manganese oxide component called hasmonite. Now, the reason hasmonite is really interesting is because it requires a temperature of 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit. And so let me just put some words to that. And so where this was located in France, hasmonite doesn't naturally occur. Now, it does naturally occur in the Pyrenees Mountains, which is a pretty far way away from where these paintings were found, about 150 miles. And so this leads us to believe that paints and pigments were important to ancient people, ancient enough to either be traded for or carried from the Pyrenees Mountains. And so that gives us a little bit of a snapshot into how important art was within those ancient cultures. Many times what they did to make art like this is that they mixed it with animal fats, which there wasn't a lot of food at the time. So using animal fat to mix paints was also another indicator that paint was really important, because instead of using animal fat to eat and get calories to survive, you're mixing it with paints to give us these images. So this particular ancient material is found in France. This is an area of France. It's called the Luberon Villages. It's in South France. This specific village is Roussillon. You can see here, right, that red ochre is just kind of found in the cliffs. There's red ochre and there's yellow ochre. They have a mine here, which is an ochre mine. And you can also see the houses that were painted also have kind of this red tint to them. It's just because there's a lot of iron oxide in the soil, which is what leads us to that ochre. And you can still, we went there a few years ago, you can still go and buy the pigment there, which is what I'll bring to class. Now, this pigment ochre is not just found in France. It's found a lot of different places. It's also found on the Tiwi Islands, right, which is the northern tip of Australia, right? And the Aboriginal population it uses red ochre in sacred ceremonies. They still believe that red is so dangerous, or for a long time they believed that the red, particularly for the ochre, was so dangerous that it could only be seen by certain men and never women, and you could be killed if you accidentally saw it. And so the question, of course, that we ask is, well, why is it so sacred? And it's still a tribal secret. It's also used throughout Africa. One of the really neat things is in South Africa, they discovered about an 80,000-year-old paint kit with shells as bowls, and the paint's still in the bowls, the pigment paints. So paint has been around, and these pigments have been around for a really long time. Now, other ancient materials that can be used for paints and pigments, of course, are seashells. You can etch shells. This is made out of calcium carbonate. So whereas ochre is mostly iron complexes, we also have some calcium complexes. Jewelry is, of course, considered an art. And so you can see some of the pearl jewelry there, again, all calcium carbonate. You etch shells a lot of times to make cameos. And so these are the shells that are used to make a cameo. This is the artist who is carving the cameo right now. So there's the cameo and there's the workstation. And then this is a finished product. This particularly is an area in Italy, right, where they carve really just beautiful cameos. Now, kind of thinking about ancient times, the Hohokam were Native Americans that lived in Central and South Arizona, and they have found these etched shells. Again, shells are calcium carbonate, as an expression of art. And so iron oxide was used in ancient times, calcium carbonate was used. Calcium carbonate is also what we find in stalactites, stalagmites, limestone, marble, right? So if you're thinking you're pretty aware of calcium carbonate, you probably are. It's all around us. Now, all of these types of materials can be used for art like statues. And so the Taj Mahal, some of the white pigments that you see. And so we'll talk more about each of these chemical formulas and how they're used to make pigments or act as bases for carvings and things like that as we go through the rest of our modules.